Hi, people. Hope you're all well. There's a number of things I want to bring into this one, so bear with me. Um, I've spoken a couple of times now about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. I found myself following it quite closely. For one reason, there is a lot of videos online which are some of them from news sources, some of them from I guess, people who are following it closely. Um, but American trials by nature tend to be very open and transparent because the whole proceedings are broadcast, which is a big difference from this country. Um, just as a point on that, actually, should we have broadcast trials? I don't know. On one hand, it certainly creates transparency and justice. That's very true because the general public gets to see how due process is done, which is probably a good thing. On the other hand, it runs the risk of becoming sensationalist and something of a media circus, particularly when celebrities are involved. That's been the case with many high profile trials in the United States, from the Michael Jackson trials um, to the Derek Chauvin trial to this, and there's many other examples. But I see both sides of that. I think I wouldn't totally rule it out as a concept. But I want to touch particularly on an aspect of this that bothers me, and I think is quite striking. Now, frustratingly, the article that I want to refer to, uh, I did manage to look at it, but now the subscriber block has come up, so I can't I can't quote it directly. But I'll try my best to recount what the basic gist of the argument was. This is obviously not verbatim, but it's the basic gist of the argument, and it's a point I want to make in this video. Now, the op-ed is by someone called Katie Edwards. I haven't heard of her before, but apparently she's a professor. Um, and she's written this op-ed in the I newspaper. And basically, this was a few days ago. This is her opening argument. She's quoting this on her Twitter account. Depp versus Heard uh, hashtag is holding a mirror up to society, and the reflection isn't pretty. The trial illuminates our darkest attitudes to women, particularly those who allege domestic and sexual abuse against men. Now, in recent days, the latest development of this trial is that one of Depp's lawyers, a woman by the name of Camille Vasquez, has been cross-examining Heard, and she has taken the gloves off, so to speak. I think Amber Heard's testimony is really falling apart. I mean, her credibility is really, really falling apart. She's now getting to the point of claiming that the photographs of Depp's injuries are photoshopped. Um, she's literally going out of her way to defend her abuse. She isn't denying it. She's trying to downplay and defend it. I mean, if you look at these proceedings, it's quite staggering how, even as a strategy, Amber Heard thinks it's going to work with the jury. Um, but basically, what I want to focus on, certainly this trial is a big part of it, and I do think this trial could be a turning point in terms of how male victims are perceived. Let me just reiterate, though, an important point. Well, two things. Firstly, if you're a self-described feminist, this video is not an attack on all feminists, okay? That's not what it is. Rather, it's a critique of certain kinds of feminists, including Katie Edwards. But I'll come to that in a minute. The other point, and I reiterate this, I am not one of those people who idolizes Johnny Depp, right? And I'm very wary not to just outright vilify Amber Heard. I've said this before. I quite like Depp as an actor. I've seen many of his films. He's obviously an A-lister. He's one of the most famous people in Hollywood. And the guy seems sincere. That's his public image. And I'm aware that just like Michael Jackson did, he has some pretty hardcore fans. There was a woman coming from Los Angeles, and she said, "Oh, we know him. We know he's innocent." Which to me is a bit, I don't really have much time for that sort of mentality. Um, you know, no one can know a celebrity that well unless they know them. So I I wouldn't give too much credence to that. Um, Rather, I'm looking at this objectively. I'm looking at the evidence that has been presented. I'm looking at the attitude of both parties involved. And I just think that of the two, Depp has a lot more credibility. Um, I don't think he's coming across perfectly. I think some of those text messages, even if they were in the vein of dark humor, weren't really ideal. But of these two individuals, um, I think the evidence of abuse is far, far stronger against Amber Heard. I really do. Now, this jury will, I imagine, have been carefully selected. I imagine there'll be no hardcore Johnny Depp fans among them because that would obviously jeopardize the trial. Um, and they have heard extensive evidence, they've heard extensive testimonies. I don't know when this is going to wrap up, but I think people will be anticipating the outcome, whether Johnny Depp is vindicated, because he's initiated this trial. He is suing her for defamation. She's countersuing for the same reason. There's something quite sad about the whole thing. I mean, these two people are having basically their dirty laundry aired to the world. And that's why I don't think people should sensationalize it. I don't think they should trivialize it. It's There's nothing good about it. It's a sad situation. But I do think that if it's a turning point in terms of how attitudes change towards male victims, um, even if Johnny Depp is maybe not as innocent as some people think, the general attitude, the debate is a good thing. The debate is a good thing. But that brings me to Katie Edwards. Now, she's not the first woman to come out with this argument. And I have to say, I do think it's a fringe opinion. I think the vast majority of people looking at this case objectively, men and women, would strongly disagree with the assertions made by Katie Edwards. Nevertheless, she's obviously got some degree of influence. She's a professor. The eyes obviously considering her important enough to have an op-ed. Um, Not long ago, the self-described feminist lawyer Charlotte Proudman, who got some notoriety in the UK. I've mentioned her before because 6 years ago, I think it was 5, 6 years ago, she sued her employer because she'd messaged him and she didn't like his reply. She claimed it was sexist. I personally think it was a gross exaggeration. His response was a little bit inappropriate. I don't think it was sleazy. Um, anyway, I made a video about that at the time. But Charlotte Proudman made an op-ed in a very similar vein. Basically, the reason why people don't trust Amber Heard is because they're sexist, and it's all one big conspiracy against women. That's basically what they're alleging now. The gist of Katie Edwards' argument was that Johnny Depp's more powerful. He's the bigger celebrity. Amber Heard was only in her 20s when she met him. Depp has had money problems. And, any sort of attempt that she is trying to hide that she's neutral on this, she says no one benefits from being Team Depp or Team Heard. And yet she goes out of her way to basically ridicule Johnny Depp. I mean, she basically says at one point in her op-ed, "Oh, poor Johnny Depp." She's talking all sarcastically because people have expressed sympathy to him. Um, but nowhere in her article she mentions that Johnny Depp lost his UK trial, which is true, but she fails to mention the evidence of abuse that has been presented that has really damaged the credibility of Amber Heard. Now, that is evidence. That's not some sort of misogynistic conspiracy. It's simple, hard evidence. I think, by the way, it's interesting that Depp's side has got a woman to cross examine her. It's probably quite sensible because if it was Mr. Chu, his other lawyer, doing it, you know, feminists would be saying, oh, it's a man bullying her. But getting another woman to do it's quite clever. It shouldn't be that way. I really don't think it should be that way, but unfortunately, under the circumstances, it probably has to be. But Camille Vasquez has, she really hasn't held back. At several points, she said, "You are the abuser, Miss Heard." She's never been rude, but she hasn't beat around the bush about this. And if you look at those, if you look at the cross examination, Heard just lacks all credibility. She really does. She looks like she's desperately trying to get the jury on her side and failing. I really believe that. Um, this idea, this is, well, I have a lot of problems with Katie Edwards' argument. But number one, let's look at this argument that there's this big conspiracy against women. It is men who are overwhelmingly disadvantaged when they have accusations made against them, not women. Not women. The damage to a man's, even an A-lister like Depp, he's testified as to how he went from, as he put it, from Cinderella to Quasimodo. And if that can happen to someone like Johnny Depp, imagine a lesser known actor, or even more so, a Joe Average. You know, so feminists like Katie Edwards, they're just totally blind to the consequences that men face because they've convinced themselves that we're living in a patriarchy, so men have all the power. So they just cannot rationalize, despite the evidence, that men are seriously damaged by such allegations, whether they're guilty or innocent. Now, in her op-ed, which I think at best is highly unprofessional, she doesn't even attempt to acknowledge the fact that there has been evidence that has went against Amber Heard. The most she can say is people can't believe that abuse happens to unlikable women. That's not verbatim, but that's basically what she was suggesting was that because Amber Heard doesn't seem very likable, oh, people are doubting her for that reason. She's ignoring the fact that some of the staunchest critics of Amber Heard are women. She's ignoring the fact that women who have said that they are victims, have been survivors rather, of domestic violence, are saying that they've been through this and what they're looking at from her body language just doesn't add up. For example, would someone who's really living in fear of a violent man insult him and ridicule him to his face? Does that really add up? If you're living in fear of someone, would you really insult them to their face casually? Not in a sort of defensive gesture, but literally laughing as you're doing it? It just doesn't make sense. Nowhere in her op ed does she acknowledge that. I wonder has she even bothered to look at the proceedings? Rather, it would seem that she is just going by the public reactions and she's trying to find this misogyny that just isn't there. The reason people are skeptical of Amber Heard is not because she's a woman, it's because of the way she comes across and because of the evidence that's been presented. Now, I will put one caveat to this. I do think there probably are some Johnny Depp fans who are a bit blinded by their fandom. I will say that. But if we look at this in a more broad sense, the insinuations that Katie Edwards and before her Charlotte Proudman are making are very damaging, and it gets into this narrative believe all women. I mean, they have a total lack of respect for due process because they've convinced themselves that we're in a patriarchy, so women are constantly disadvantaged. Um, if you have a woman accusing a man of something serious, okay, you might get people who will blame her, you might get people who will question her, but in terms of the implications of that, it's the man who's more likely to be dropped if he's an actor from productions, if he's a politician, to be deselected, and so on. And what I find pretty obnoxious and pretty stubborn actually is the way that certain feminists just cannot bring themselves. They just seem incapable of acknowledging that there are challenges that men face in these sort of situations. And they seem incapable of accepting that some women are liars, that some women are capable of abuse. And even if you say, well, let's take, for example, people who have died at the hands of the partner, the overwhelming number are women at the hands of men. That's true. But that doesn't account for the many, many cases of abuse that may not be reported, that may not result in fatalities, that may result in suicides, that may well be men. Um, and what I find most frustrating about these sort of feminists is their basic immaturity, their failure to even acknowledge that the other side may also face challenges because their whole worldview is women are kept down, men have all the power, and so if things are looking bad for a woman, well, it must be sexism. It must be sexism. And I find it even difficult to debate with such people because it's like anyone with a victimhood mindset. It's similar with issues around race. You know, if you try debating with someone who is convinced that you're being racist because you disagree with them, you can't meet halfway. You just can't. Because no matter how reasonable you try to be, you know, if as a man, for example, you try debating with this sort of feminist, if you get angry and frustrated by her nonsense, by her stubbornness, by her utter extreme bias, then oh, you're being a bully. You know, you're treating her badly as a woman. If you try reasoning with her, well, then it's patronizing. You know, you're talking down to her. So honestly, I think it's just very, very difficult to reason with someone like this. I think someone like Charlotte Proudman, who calls herself a feminist lawyer, I mean, that to me raises questions about her bias. Obviously, I don't know what sort, if she's a prosecutor or a defense lawyer specifically. I know she's campaigned on issues like FGM, which is fine. That's an important issue. But, you know, say, for example, she was a prosecutor. Now, she self-described herself as a feminist lawyer. How is a man going to have a fair trial when someone like Charlotte Proudman is on the case? Because she has an agenda, and it makes me wonder how professional she would actually be. I do feel that these sort of feminists are a minority. I do. I think even many women who might call themselves feminists would recognize that they are just zealots, right? So I have friends, female friends, who would probably call themselves feminists, and I probably wouldn't agree with them on absolutely everything, obviously. But I think even they would say, yeah, that's ridiculous, if they looked at this op-ed. And usually what I do is put a link to these sort of things, but like I say, there's a paywall coming up, so I'll put a link if you happen to be subscribed to the eye. But incidentally, I also caught a glimpse on Twitter, and again, that's kind of zoomed me out, but there were quite a few people responding to her, I'm pleased to say. Now, I've written a letter to the eye in response. I think, you know, newspapers have a responsibility. If they have someone who is making an op-ed, an opinion piece, I think there should be right of response by readers. And I've done that, whether they publish or not, I don't know. I have been published in the Eye before, but it's been quite a few years now. Anyway, this is what I wrote because I just thought the whole angle she took was so utterly, utterly biased. And this is what I wrote. Katie Edwards, May 17th, insinuates that the animosity and mistrust of Amber Heard in the defamation trial with Johnny Depp is solely because she is a woman. I consider this a lazy and in itself sexist argument. Whilst it is true some Depp superfans will be perhaps blinded by fan bias, many of us who have closely followed this trial have done so in an objective way. I neither idolize Depp or vilify Heard. The offer failed to make any acknowledgement of the clear evidence that has been presented demonstrating Ms. Heard's abusive behaviour. Indeed, it seems Katie Edwards cannot bring herself to accept that some women are indeed capable of abuse. This attitude is dangerous, not to mention misandric, because it erodes the very concept of due process for men who face abuse allegations under the notion that all women must be always telling the truth. This trial does not eliminate dark attitudes to women, rather, the author's argument only reveals her own ostensible bias against men. Now, I must admit, I was frustrated when I wrote that because I think it was just an utterly obnoxious op ed. And, you know, people like this have a degree of influence. I don't want to exaggerate their influence, but it is there because they are the driving forces behind movements like Me Too. Um, And so I think it's valid to question their attitudes to things like this. Um, you know, you can make the argument that too often women are not believed. Okay, make that argument. But don't insinuate that all women must be telling the truth all the time. That's a fundamentally sexist argument. It's fundamentally sexist to say, to just ignore the challenges men face and to imply that whenever a man is accused, that he is somehow benefiting from. I mean, it's an absolutely perverse and absurd argument that Johnny Depp would benefit in any way. Yes, he has a lot of fan support, but I'm sure this is the last thing he wanted to do. As he testified, the only reason he's done it is to clear his name. I mean, don't forget, a lot of things are going to have indeed come out about him in this trial. So why would he put himself through that if he wasn't telling the truth? I'm just looking at it from a rational point of view. I'm not looking at it as a battle of the sexes. Oh, he's a man, so I'm believing him. I mean, I'd cited the case of Mel Gibson and Miss Gregieva, I forget her first name, his Russian partner. Now, in that case, I felt that she had the stronger case. Um, Basically, Mel Gibson made some um, extremely angry messages. He threatened her. It was pretty awful. I just think the two cases are different, and that's why I don't see it as a battle of the sexes, and I hope it doesn't descend into that. But I don't think it has. I think a lot of the people defending Johnny Depp are women. And this is another point that Katie Edwards is ignoring. Or maybe she thinks all her fellow women are part of the patriarchy. Um, I do, like I say, I think these sort of feminists are in the minority, but they're very vocal and very confident and very, very stubborn. They just seem incapable of thinking, well, could it be possible maybe Amber Heard isn't telling the truth? Could it be possible that people are judging her because of the way she's come across, not because she's a woman, but because of the way she's come across? She talks about people are analyzing her body language. Well, yes, it's a cross examination. Of course, people are going to be analyzing it. And frankly, I would believe someone who's been through this in terms of how they would respond to being on the stand if they've been through domestic violence. I think um, their accounts must count for something. I would much sooner believe someone like that than a feminist who just has an agenda for that particular reason. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I am frankly tired of these sort of misandric bigots because I think that's what they are. I think when you're pushing an agenda against half the human race, when you're trying to pull the narrative that women must always be right and women are kept down and men are always wrong, that is a fundamentally sexist position to hold. And of course, they're clever. I mean, they're clever enough to argue the way around this and say, oh, no, no, we're not against men. And yet, every single time they take a stand, it is always with this narrative. So what else is it other than misandry? Let me know your thoughts, and I could put a link, but you might not be able to open it. But they are a minority, but so unfortunately they're quite an influential minority.